Gentlewoman from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as an original co-sponsor of this bill, I rise in support of the Homeless Emergency Act and Rapid Transition to Housing Act of 2008, or the HEART Act. I'd also like to thank Congressman Jeff Davis of Kentucky, and if she were here today, the original House version sponsor, the late Congresswoman Julia Carson, for introducing this bill, H.R. 840. In addition, I'd like to thank Chairman Frank, Subcommittee Chairwoman Waters, and Ranking Members Baucus and Capito for working together with Congressman Davis and me to give homeless children a fighting chance in this country. I'd also like to thank all of the staff on both sides of the aisle for all of their hard work. Scott Olson, Jonathan Harwitz, Cindy Chetty, Talman Johnson, Lauren O'Brien, Aaron Spirk, Andrew Stevens, Kathleen Taylor, Clinton Jones, Nicole Austin. And tremendous thanks for all they've done. Mr. Speaker, for inclusion in the congressional record, I'd like to submit additional views authored by Congressman Jeff Davis, Congresswoman Capito, and me. These views were filed as part of our committee report to accompany H.R. 840, but they apply to this bill, H.R. 7221, as amended as well. In addition, I'd like to submit a New York Times article from September 16, 2008, titled, "Capitol Strives to Define Homeless." Thank you. Mr. Speaker, homelessness among children has become more and more pervasive as we face increasing economic challenges. A study conducted by First Focus and the Brookings Institute determined that 2 million children will be unfairly affected by the foreclosure crisis. Many of these children will become homeless, but without this compromise bill, HUD's very narrow definition of homeless will prevent many of these children from qualifying for housing assistance or services. It's hard to believe that anyone would argue the issue of who is homeless when it comes to homeless children. But believe it or not, that for the past 15 years has been the crux of the debate on this bill. As it stands today, HUD's definition includes those individuals on the street or in a shelter, but it excludes hundreds of thousands of children living in involuntary and unstable conditions, shared living arrangements such as those living temporarily in motels or hotels or couch surfing from house to house. Mr. Speaker, there is no question that these children are homeless. When you hear them describe their lives, you can't help but understand why local homeless providers desperately want the flexibility to offer them services. Here's one story from Kentucky, and I quote, "I have lived in many homes and shelters. Just this past year, I have lived in 12 different homes. I have lived with classmates, teachers, friends, and strangers. Anyone who would accept me was better than the street. I've always dreamed of being free. I want the freedom to know where I'm going to sleep, the freedom to know where my belongings are, and the freedom to know that I won't be asked to leave in the morning or at the end of the week." End quote. Mr. Speaker, it's because of a story like this that last fall we began working with members of the Financial Services Committee, staff, and government and non-government organizations representing various homeless constituencies to craft a new definition that includes homeless, unaccompanied youth, children, and their families. These are families that are already considered homeless by all other federal programs, but not recognized by HUD as homeless, and therefore do not qualify for aid. I'm pleased to report that the legislation we are considering today contains a compromise definition that will allow many more homeless, unaccompanied youth, children, and their families to access HUD services. There are still some things to work out with this bill, which is why I support a 2-year reauthorization of the program. During that time, we can work towards fixing provisions in this bill that don't seem to line up. For example, there is a provision that explicitly excludes from HUD's official count of the U.S. homeless population all the homeless children and their families that fall under the bill's new definition. That doesn't make much sense. In addition, the bill directs HUD to issue new regulations relating to the newly defined homeless children and families. I had hoped that this provision would include a negotiated rulemaking process so that all of the stakeholders involved could reach a consensus before a new rule is proposed. However, HUD is not required to do so and could dismiss one side, the children's side, during the rulemaking process. It is my hope that our committee will continue to review this matter. Finally, the bill sets funding restrictions on homeless children and families. It sets up a 10% cap on the funds that local homeless providers can use to serve these newly included populations. Were a local homeless provider to reach the limit, they would be forced to arbitrarily turn away homeless children and families. Clearly, this is an issue worth revisiting. Mr. Speaker, despite these flaws, the legislation before us today will allow HUD to far more effectively complement the efforts of educators, service providers, and people like my friend and constituent Diane Nyland of Naperville, Illinois, who has worked so hard on this issue, as well as Barbara Duffield and Jeremy Rosen. Mr. Speaker, this Congress has supported increased housing availability and affordability for many low-income individuals, families facing foreclosure, and disaster victims. I ask members to continue that trend and at least allow homeless children to qualify for safe and stable housing by voting for H.R. 7221. With that, I would reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman from Wisconsin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, I want to thank my colleague for all of her hard work. But in addition to thanking her, I think it's really important to acknowledge Senator Jack Reed and Senator Allard, who put a great deal of time into this as well. It's worth mentioning that we've made one change to the introduced bill. Concerns had been raised about the factors in the bill and whether they would result in adverse changes to certain communities in the funding formula. We fully accounted for those concerns by using more generic language that reinforces the goals and objectives of the bill.